Plains Indians depended on several different kinds of animals to provide many of their daily needs. The bison was at the center of life for the early Plains Indians. The bison is the largest land animal to roam North America in modern times. These enormous animals provided most of what the Plains peoples needed to live. Plains Indians were experts at hunting bison and making use of every part of the animal. The clothes they wore and the cone-shaped tents they lived in, called teepees, were made from bison hides. They sharpened the bones of bison and carved them into tools. They used the horns of bison to make spoons, cups, rattles, and toys. They braided shaggy bison hair into rope. The bison was like a walking store, providing food, clothing, tools, and more. Even bison waste was put to use. Plains Indians used it as fuel for their campfires. Before they acquired horses, early Plains Indians traveled on foot. They relied on dogs to carry heavy loads as they followed bison herds across the plains. They loaded their supplies and belongings onto a kind of sled called a travois. A travois was made of two poles tied together in a V shape, with strips of rawhide stretched across the V. The travois was attached to the shoulders of a dog, which dragged the load behind itself. Horses changed the way Plains Indians lived. With horses, Plains Indians could travel farther and faster than ever before. It made their nomadic lifestyle easier, allowing them to move their camps from place to place as they followed the bison. Plains Indians also found that they could track and hunt bison more effectively on horseback. Tribes such as the Crow gave up their farming lifestyle to become nomadic hunters. Horses also made them more effective warriors, able to attack their enemies quickly and suddenly. Hunting was one of the most important parts of the Plains Indian culture. Plains Indians hunted many animals, but none was more important to them than the bison. The nomadic tribes moved from place to place to stay close to the wandering bison. Farming tribes of the prairies left their villages each summer to take part in annual hunts. Hunting was a community activity for the peoples of the Great Plains. Plains Indians developed clever techniques for hunting bison. Hunters on foot might sneak up on a herd by covering themselves in wolf skins. This way they could get close to the animals without alarming them. Another strategy was to start grass fires that would frighten the bison into stampeding to their deaths off tall cliffs. After Plains Indians acquired horses, they became skillful riders who could hunt while moving at high speeds. When the hunt was over and the bison were killed, there was still much work to do. Women worked to preserve the meat for future use. They also worked at tanning the bison hide, turning it into leather that could be used for robes and bedding. Farming was the main source of food and wealth for those early Plains Indians that lived in villages. Farming tribes lived on very fertile land along the major rivers of the Great Plains. With plentiful rain and good growing conditions, they could grow more corn and other crops than they needed. Extra crops could be traded with other tribes for metal tools, cloth, bison hides, and other valuable goods. Farming tribes almost always planted corn alongside squash and beans. Corn stalks provided a pole for bean vines to climb. The leaves of the squash plants helped keep the soil moist. Because the three crops worked so well together, they were often called the Three Sisters. Farming tribes also grew pumpkins, sunflowers, and tobacco. The nomadic hunters in the early Great Plains lived in teepees. Teepees were made of bison hides sewn together. The hides covered a frame of wooden poles that formed a cone shape. Inside the teepee was a fire pit lined with rocks. Beds made of bison hides were arranged around the fire. Since the farming tribes of the prairie did not move around as much as the nomadic hunters, they built more permanent homes. The Wichita and Caddo people built grass houses by covering a circular framework of wooden poles with thick bundles of grass called thatch. Other farming villages used earth lodges with dome-like roofs. These lodges were made of heavy timber posts covered by willow branches and layers of sod and earth. People entered their lodge through a covered tunnel. This led to a roomy interior that could hold a number of families or related people. Like the hunting tribes, farming peoples also used teepees, but only for their yearly hunting trips onto the Great Plains. Men and women each had their own roles to play in daily life. For men, life revolved around hunting and warfare. They trained and tended horses, and they made weapons such as bows, arrows, and lances. They also were leaders, making decisions about where their people should hunt and whether they should start a war. Women tended farm fields and homes. They put up and took down teepees. They made clothing, hauled firewood, and prepared meals. They cared for children and carried infants on their back in baby carriers called cradle boards as they worked.